Hello and greetings to everybody. I hope all of you are okay. My name is Siphamandla Zondi. I am Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. And I'm formerly the chairperson of the South African BRICS Think Tank Council, from where I know a number of you. Renato, Akshay, and Ekaterina. I still got a number of colleagues that I know from that terrain. It's a great honor to have you here. It's really great to have you in this discussion. Now, colleagues, this seminar, which is a joint roundtable with the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation here at the University of Johannesburg, the Institute for Global Dialogue, and of course our colleague from the Center for African, Latin American, and Caribbean Studies at OP General Global University. Karin was a key member of this putting together this roundtable. In this year, when the BRICS holds its summit in South Africa in August, it is very clear that its long-term economic agenda is right on the table again. It is very clear that its commitment to global reform has now been put into sharp focus. It is very clear that its commitment to the reform of international finance, and including international finance institutions, is also in focus. It's very clear that its commitment going back to 2009 to reform the international finance system, including the payment system, in order to reflect a shift more towards a multipolar system in the world. It's very clear. And the recent debates across the world and across the global south generally around the need for alternative payment system in a very competitive environment, and the need to explore alternative currencies in matters of trade where the countries involved agree, has also made BRICS' position on this matter a topical issue. There is a lot of expectation that in August, the BRICS will say something further than the currency, the contingency currency, reserve currency system that it set up some time back, and go further into the payment system, and affirming the growing trend towards alternative currencies and trading in currencies and local currencies among countries in situations that permit. Now, the question is, how will the BRICS or should the BRICS approach the subject of this move towards a payment system that reflects a multipolar aspiration of the day? And what will this entail in terms of the form of the international finance system and old global south objective, the reform of the international finance system? And how could this be negotiated? What would be the impediments? What would be the enablers? What are the pitfalls and what are the advantages? An open conversation we must have about this very crucial subject. And we as the organizers are very glad to have a powerful panel of great thinkers, great friends from Brazil, from Russia, from India, and from China, and from South Africa, and also colleagues who are here to help us conduct this discussion in 2 sessions. Allow me, colleagues, again to welcome you and say we warmly welcome you. You colleagues who are the panelists, for agreeing to be part of this conversation. It's a great honor for us. And we'd also like to welcome those who are watching us online and those who are joining us on this platform and the Zoom platform as well. We really hope that you will make your contribution. Please use the Q&A platform on this platform. There's a Q&A next to chat in order to ask your question, so that your question can also be answered live or be answered after a session or after a speaker has spoken. You are okay to use the chat box if you have a difficulty with the Q&A system. We should go over that. Please make sure that when you get an opportunity to ask questions, colleagues, please keep it cool, keep it respectful, but keep it brief as well. Without much further ado, speakers, we are going to start. We have a panel that is going to open this, and that is made up of the colleagues, as I would take them one by one. I will start with Dr. Ekaterina A first. Dr. Ekaterina A first is from the Center for Strategic Research in the Russian Federation. And she has a long experience studying and researching and writing on matters of the world economy and reform, trade, energy, and other great matters of world economy. Ekaterina, you have your moment to speak. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor Zondi, and I'm actually very grateful for such an opportunity to perform at such powerful and great platform. I want to say about the BRICS payment system and what is happening now with it. So actually, after the 14th summit, BRICS summit, the main objective of the countries was established, and it is the creation of the joint BRICS payment system, or so-called BRICS Pay. It was later on discussed in 2017 and 18 and 19 by the BRICS business communities, but in 2022, it was now established as a goal and main objective. So why was it established as so, and which advantages will the BRICS Pay system bring onto the international financial markets? So mainly BRICS Pay is proposed as integrated payment system, which will make possible for the BRICS member countries to use national currencies as a direct basis of exchange for external payments instead of using US dollar and engaging with the US bank as well. Nowadays, there are several multilateral agreements between the BRICS countries. However, no greater joint system was established. And there is a great need nowadays for establishing such a joint system. The BRICS Pay system will also allow the members to reduce their dependence on international payment organizations such as SWIFT, mainly increasing independence from the SWIFT system has been brought on by for Russia by sanctions, which was brought on by the Western world and the Western economies. And nowadays, we can be sure that no country is free from such sanctions, and there is an increasing need to establish a joint system that will be free from SWIFT system. So BRICS Pay can be established as one of the systems that will save from the dependence on the SWIFT system and US dollar as well. So we can see that there is a great need, and nowadays in the changing world and in the multipolar world, there is a need for the joint actions, the joint system, and the opportunity to create a new world balance where developing countries can say and increase and show their needs to the rest of the world and to the international financial market. But there are some problems to it, and there are some problems to the establishing of the BRICS joint system. So mainly there is a lack of financial infrastructure that does not yet allow the BRICS member to make a complete break from the existing international financial system, dollar-based financial system, and payment system as well. There is a need for investment in the financial infrastructure and creating a additional BRICS institution that will help promote developing of the BRICS payment system. Also, the second problem that now BRICS face as that BRICS face that every country in BRICS face, it's actually BRICS members lack a group level agreement on creation of a joint payment system. Yes, we all agree that we need, but it's in the distant future, and nobody seems to really be investing in the creation of the financial institutions right now. Also, a lot of BRICS countries want to reduce their reliance on the US currency and US payment system, but not all countries find it urgent in the moment for them, for example, Brazil or South Africa. And there is a need to speed up this process of creating a payment system and financial institutions together. Also, nowadays, the majority of BRICS countries still retain significant quantities of dollar assets in their reserves, and it actually stops from creating a joint payment system and a joint financial system together. Because when we talk about payment system, we also need to stress our attention on the de-dollarization fact that has to be discussed now. Existing financial realities and payment realities and the world that we are in, the financial realities will not change in the short order and in the very fast time. However, the processes need to be sped up. The dialogue has to be promoted between the BRICS countries. We should all become together as a joint force to create a payment system, a financial institution, new world market where developing countries can say and promote their interest, joint interest as well. As you may remember, Russia has also proposed that BRICS Pay has also can be also proposed to BRICS Plus countries and invite them to the joint dialogue and invest more in creating independent world from Western payment systems. Breaking away from the present dollar-based system and financial payment systems, Western payment systems such as SWIFT, is actually very urgent for now, not only for BRICS countries, but the global economy as well. So I think that it will bring also for BRICS countries costs, the separation costs from the existing financial and payment systems, and in the immediate time, it will cost the BRICS countries the money, of course, and however, in the long run, it will create a great independence for our countries, and it will allow us to separate our payment systems as well and become more independent and strong together. So I think that mainly that's all that I wanted to say about creating the BRICS financial payment system and financial system as well. And I will make sure to answer the questions if they will arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ekaterina, for dropping us those nuggets of thoughts that we would then debate and discuss as the discussion goes on. Thank you so much. Without much further ado, I head off to Delhi. I have Akshay Mathur, is currently at Harvard University as an Edward S. Mason Fellow, doing an MA in public administration. And is also at the same time a senior fellow with the Center for International Governance Innovation in Fiji in Canada. And he's worked in a number of areas of international relations, including the global trade system, global digital governance. And he's worked before for the Gateway House and the ORF, where I got to know him. And Akshay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Zondi. It's good to see you, and I appreciate Karen reaching out to curate this. It's good to see some old friends, and I'm very glad and delighted that the conversations are still being curated around this subject, particularly under this presidency. I think the way I wanted to make maybe the way I'd like to frame this is in terms of my own area of study, which is an intersection between geopolitics and geoeconomics. And as I started to do some research for this particular session, I went back to some of the conversations we had back all the way back to 2011, 2012, 2013, 14. And it occurred to me that I think while some of us in track 1 and track 2 dialogues have retained this thread of BRICS and international finance, BRICS and dollarization, de-dollarization, BRICS and local currency and payment systems. The motivation for why we have been doing this seems to have been changing over time. It seems to me, if I were to be a little reductionist, I think that back in the first 5 years of the formation of BRICS, when we had these conversations around an alternate financial payment system or alternate financial infrastructure, it was mainly driven by geoeconomics. I think maybe perhaps for China, there was an element of geopolitical considerations. At that time, the formation of G2 was really real. And I think for most of the other BRICS and for other parts of the world as well, the drivers were mainly geoeconomics, I felt. We were coming out of the global financial crisis. BRICS was seeded by Goldman Sachs, and there was, these were 5 vibrant economies. And there was this impetus and motivation to develop an alternate system because we wanted better resiliency of the international financial system. And some of the emerging markets were very badly affected, and we felt that BRICS were rightly placed because they were large enough that they could actually even have the gumption and the resources to propose an alternate system, but still not part of the advanced economies that you could completely overturn or overthrow the existing system. So it was these proposals that developed, and I think the motivation at that time were more geoeconomics than geopolitics. I feel over time that's changed a little bit as the nature of BRICS changed as well. I think the internal drivers on what kept BRICS together became more strategic. And I think that had an influence on some of the instruments and ideas that we have used within BRICS as well. Even today, I feel like the ideas of international payment systems, maybe BRICS Pay, others have more geopolitical impetus than geoeconomic. And for instance, some of the sanctions that at one point were imposed unilaterally on Russia or on Iran was a concern in India as well. And I think that we all felt that there was a need for having better resiliency of the international financial system so that it's not so brittle. And of course, creating that environment required both a sort of like a strategic understanding of what was happening in the world. Now, a practical, whether it was geoeconomic or geopolitics, yes, the practical way to manifest this idea has been how to look at the infrastructure, the interoperability, creating the instruments, making sure they interoperate, making sure RuPay and UnionPay and others can actually come together into a payment system. I think pragmatically, we've done slightly better in running pilots and maybe even testing out. I'm not speaking for the government. I don't know what the latest negotiations are, but certainly it felt like the pilot projects have been somewhat successful, and the ideas were tested for their feasibility. I also felt that while we were testing these things out, we lost sight in BRICS, maybe lost sight, or maybe it became difficult to completely reform the existing international financial system. I think we're all realize that we are too entrenched. All the countries are too entrenched in the existing financial architecture. It is not just about de-dollarizing, but everything that the dollar is connected to. Our economies are connected, our financial system, our commodity markets, our benchmarks. So all three attributes that is required of a global currency, which is as a unit of value, as a unit of storage, and so I think, and as a unit of reserve, and I think on all three counts, dollar seems to have retained its leadership. And so therefore, while whether the motivation was geopolitics, geoeconomics, and even though we had tested out and pilot tested this idea, I think it was not enough to create, or at least create substantial changes in the international financial system. And I think that may just be a natural and organic process, because the world has seen some of the other big shocks as well, related to the pandemic, related to climate change. And so I think it was a judicious decision on the part of everybody in the world, BRICS and other countries, to just take this experimentation a little slowly. You don't want to add additional stress to the system. And so in my mind, I think it was a great idea that then were tested through the system and has been baked both in concept as well as in proof of concept, as well as in instrumentation. And now I think we are somewhat faced with an interesting question. I think the question is this, that we have, in addition, a new concept developing, or a new phenomena, which is that of friendshoring. And whether we are able to now put this BRICS, our understanding of the BRICS financial, what BRICS countries want out of the international financial system, or what we want are specific instruments in BRICS, such as the BRICS Pay. What do we want out of this? Given that there is new alignments taking place in global supply chains, and there's friendshoring. And so will we be successful if we had a system, but the trade and the supply chains were actually moving away from BRICS? I'm not so sure. I do not think that will be very successful. So I think that the payment system and the financial architecture will only go as far as the real economy and real trade and supply chains are changing. So it has to be aligned. It has to be commensurate. There has to be some congruence between the financial architecture and the trading architecture. And I see trading architecture, the supply chains, they're shifting, more friendshoring taking place. And I do not see the same the dynamism in the trading architecture between BRICS that the financial architecture will then keep up. So I'll stop there, only to conclude by saying that there are a lot of shocks that are currently in the system. we're recovering from COVID and so many other challenges to the global financial system. While we have experimented a little bit, I think we just need to keep our eye on the real economy. And unless the BRICS coalesce and the trading architecture, the financial architecture will not come together and coalesce to support the trading architecture. So I'll stop then. We're happy to take more questions later. Thanks.
Thank you, Akshay. Thank you for making that point, that the payment system is for payment arrangement on an economy and economic linkages and economic and value chains that are existing. It can't be built in the air. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we had in the program Professor Shani, which is from the Center for BRICS Studies at Fudan University. We is not yet here. We will proceed to the Q&A session now, while we try and make contact with him. And then as soon as he's able to come in, we will then take him from there. And then we will proceed on that basis. Colleagues, we've had quite a mouthful already. So the floor is open. I see that there's quite a number of questions that are on the platform. The first one is a set of three questions. What do we do with foreign reserves in our balance of payment account? They're given this idea about creating a BRICS payment system. What do we do with foreign reserves that are in our balance of payment account? And then how do we pay our debt? Then in which currency do you pay your debt? Now this one for South Africa, there isn't anyone on the platform on South Africa. What currency do we give South Africans who want to visit to the United States? I guess it goes for Indians as well. I said, what currencies do they use if they're visiting the United States? So, and then Yanda also say, what currency do we use to trade with the United States and stuff? I guess many of these questions related to what is this that we are talking about? And I guess a lot of clarity can be given by the two colleagues. Then Mzingaye says he knows that the BRICS countries are nuclear powers who are militarily and economically strong, which makes them easier to transition to a non-dollar payment system. I guess the issue there is that do you link their being nuclear powers and being big and strong to the ease of transition to a non-dollar payment system? Can that link be made? I know that Akshay referred to geopolitics. Would you make that the connection? That it's much easier for them than it would be for countries that are maybe weaker than the BRICS, smaller than the BRICS. But it says, but among these, South Africa's economy, it remains weak, and it's pretty much dependent on the United States economy, and therefore it can be easily punished by US if it ever transitions to a non-dollar international payment system. So what do the BRICS do to address this unique position of South Africa? Ask. And then the last one is by Blessing. Blessing said, what is the feasibility of a financial infrastructure to be non-fiat? I don't understand that. What is the possibility of it being non-fiat? I hope you understand that. I hope you can make it a little easier to understand, Blessing. I don't understand what you mean by non-fiat. Yeah, okay. Now, can we take those questions? Maybe I'll start with Ekaterina, and then and I will be looking out for also for hands. I hope there isn't a question that is in the chat. There are no hands up at the moment. Can we take these questions and then we come to the second round of questions? Ekaterina?
Yes, I do. I will open them as well. Well, I can start from the last question and the visibility of the non-fiat currencies and what are the prospects of them. Well, actually, mainly all the BRICS countries are now interested in creating and establishing their own digital currency. It is central bank digital currencies. Nowadays, there are a lot of discussions in the government of the Russian Federation of issuing crypto ruble and digital ruble as well. China has done it. Brazil is looking into it. India as well. South Africa is also looking into prospects of it. And nowadays, if digital currencies has not been used at a wide range, and it is not a general practice in these countries, but BRICS members are actively looking into it. So there is a great possibilities that the BRICS countries, as well as a membership, will create its own joint digital currency that can be used in every country, in every member country. So there is a great possibility in it. And in terms of what is happening in Russia right now, digital ruble is a very discussed possibility, and we're looking actively into it. So that is my answer to that question. I will also would like to answer to the question about, nowadays, in terms of the main theme of our panel is creating a payment system. And I think that BRICS countries should, before talking about de-dollarization and creating separate financial system, we should talk about payment system, which first of all will promote trade, tourism, trade of goods and services, promote cooperation between the countries. I think that this will not create any difficult situations between South Africa and US, because we're talking about payment system, not the financial system. So this will only promote cooperation and greater trade flows. Also, regarding other questions that has been asked about
in what currencies do we pay our debt? In other words, does this payment system that affect how we now manage our debt? We already have debts in dollars, we have debts in euros, we have debts in other currencies.
If we're talking about the existing debts, of course, the debts should be paid in the currencies that has been established in the existing debts we are talking. They should be paid out in the dollars and euros because they're existing debts. If we're talking about creating new debts, that this should be discussed. Maybe instead of taking loans in US dollars, we should consider taking them from the other countries and other currencies as well. And this, in order to do this, there should be unilateral relationships and agreements on currency payments in local currencies, not using the US dollars. But regarding the existing loans, I think that that cannot be changed in a short time. So this, about the currencies that I think that we gave to South Africans who want to visit US, I think that is quite is a question to ask to answer. Nobody gives anyone currencies at all, but we're talking about US dollars, because if you're traveling to US, as well as if you want to travel to Russia, most likely that you have to buy Russian rubles in order to pay here. So I think this question can be answered this way. Also, I'm reading other questions. I'm so sorry.
Yes. I think it's fine. I think that's sufficient. That's sufficient. We already, I think we already buy the rupee if we want to go to India when we travel, and we already have to get the SEFA if you're going to West Africa, and then do the, so it basically doesn't really change the currencies in terms of what you do when you are traveling as an individual privately. This doesn't force you to buy only the BRICS currency or something. I think that's the concern at the back of their mind. Thank you. Akshay, do you want to pick up on the one about geopolitics and all that? And maybe also on any other of the questions, such as the fact, I mean, it's true for India as well, there's a huge trade relationship with the US. Does de-dollarization necessarily mean anti-US? Perhaps I think that's what it is. Does it mean abandon?
Yes, India does have a big trading relationship with the US, and I think more than having a geopolitical concern about de-dollarization, there is a geoeconomic concern about de-dollarization. We have to pay the United States and all the other countries we trade with in dollars for everything that we import. There is so much oil that we import. And we do it through many other countries in the world, and they all expect dollars from us. And so holding dollar reserves is very important. You know, we pay dollars to Saudi Arabia, to Iran, to Venezuela, to Angola. And so I think that having I'm not exactly sure what they call it. So fundamentally, I think I think maybe there's a conceptual clarification that is required here.
Yes, yeah.
Number one, you always take debt in the guiding principle is to always take debt in the currency in which you're generating revenue. Because then that way you avoid currency risks that come with it. So if you are generating revenue in dollars, you try to take debt in dollars. If you're generating revenue in say renminbi, then you try to take debt in renminbi. But if you try to take say if you're generating revenue in rupees and you take debt in renminbi, and then that creates a mismatch because you're not able to pay back appropriately. So that's number one. Number two, on the reserves itself, we have to keep reserves because you have to make payments internationally, and you make payments internationally based on what it is that the other country is expecting. So you need dollars to do that. Number three, and perhaps this is the most important point, the reason that the world keeps their reserves or currencies in dollars is because the United States has that kind of economy that can sustain that kind of dollar reserves for all the countries in the world. So for instance, I think if I remember my numbers correctly, I've not checked it lately, but for an $18 trillion economy that the United States is, it holds close to $6 trillion worth of global reserves for other countries in the world. $6 trillion is double the size of the Indian economy, for instance. So the United States holds that much for other countries in the world. Right. So it has that kind of fixed income markets. It has that kind of bond market. So there is no other countries no other country in the world. Maybe Eurozone and Europe is an alternative, but there is no other region or country in the world that has that kind of depth. That's why people keep holding dollar reserves. They're unable to change it into another currency because no one else has the ability. So for instance, if the United States has $6 trillion worth of reserves from other countries, and one country decides saying, I'm pulling all my money out, and takes away like $100 billion out of their system, it's a blip in the ocean. Nothing happens to the American economy. But I'll tell you that if $100 billion worth of rupees were taken out of the Indian economy, the Indian stock markets would crash, So it matters that there is a large economy like the United States. It matters that they have a big fixed income market. It matters that they are able to keep other people's reserves into their system, and that can freely take the money in and out of their system without creating a blip in their economy or in the international markets. So I don't think, Professor Shani, I don't think I answered the question in the line in the order in which they were given, but I hope that was useful.
Yes, no, thank you very much. That was useful. But I would like you to comment as well on the debt issue, whether there are not risks related to debt that come with exploring alternative payment system. You want to comment on that?
Which question is?
The question is talk about now. What about our debt? If our debts, in what currency will we then be paying our debt if we go for a particular currency?
Yeah,
I guess a conceptual clarification there.
Yeah, so that's the so as long as you're taking your debt in dollars, you will have to you'll have to pay back in dollars, and therefore you should always keep dollars. That's really what it is. If you're taking your debt, say if you've borrowed from Russia and you're taking your debt in rubles, and then you should keep some rubles because you'll have to pay the principal and the interest back in rubles to Russian entities. So that's really how it is.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, and I think that exhausts the questions that we got. And Blessing was going to pose the question again because we're not understanding what the question he was making. We've seen colleagues. I would like us to welcome Professor Shani, who's since joined us. Professor Shani, you are welcome. Warmly welcome. We're looking forward to you. And we had started with the 2 speakers, and you are the 3rd speaker. And I would like to give you the platform now. Professor Shani is the director of the BRICS Research Center at Fudang University, and previously a director of the Research Center for the Governance of Global Cyberspace at Fudang University. And graduated from the Department of International Politics and in the School of International Relations and Public Affairs, and has served in the faculty, focusing a lot on internet governance, cyber diplomacy, cyber health. And then he also studied at Georgetown University and comes with a lot of experience in international relations. Professor Shani, this is the seminar, and everybody looking forward to hear from you, your thoughts.
So how many times do I have?
An alternative payment system and alternative currencies. The floor is yours. You're warmly welcome.
Okay, thank you. On these questions, my background focusing on international relations and especially cybersecurity strategies in the general framework of the national security research. Since these payment systems and international financial systems is quite different, it's not my education background which is focusing on these things. So I providing 3 or 5 points how to understanding these issues from my perspectives. First, I think these payment systems as part of the most important component of international financial infrastructures has 2 different meanings, have 2 different aspects to understand the importance of the role it plays into this world. One, it's kind of function aspect, which means it's really works to which extent we can take good advantages of the development of latest ICT technologies to facilitate trade and financial activities among different actors all around the world. And second, on the other aspect, definitely, even though it's these payment systems, it's part of these financial infrastructures, it has very strong symbolic meanings in the more general framework of geopolitics or the international relations framework. People talking about these payment systems, especially when talking about some countries, those rising powers try to contribution new payment systems, it's actually talking about the powers. This payment system become a highly symbolic infrastructures representing the new distribution of powers among different great states in the world. So today, when we're talking about whether we can have a new or alternative payment systems, actually is talking about how to understand the financial orders produced and mainly maintained by the United States and the Western countries in quite a long times, and how to avoid the risks, the vulnerabilities, and meeting these challenges triggered by the power shifting or power transitions among these old great powers and the newly rising new powers in the world represented by the BRICS member states, including China. And on that aspect, we have to balance, talking about this, is we have make a balanced observations on these payment systems. On one hand, we have to focusing on the real development, including the development of technologies, including the development of these real financial economic trade activities among great powers. In this real aspect, we're finding that the focus of international financial systems is become more distributed, not only focusing around the United States and its very close allies, but it's distributed to more broad countries. These days, the G7 countries holding their annual conference and annual summit in Japan. In the 1990s, all these 7 countries, they represented more than 70% of the total GDP of the world. At that time, people can say that these 7 countries are the leaders of the world. Their decisions, no matter on economic issues or geopolitical issues, has great effect to today's world. But nowadays, these 7 countries only represent about 40% of total GDP of the world, which means they cannot say themselves as kind of dominant leaders. In Japanese mainstream media, they say that these G7 states, they can no longer leading the world, but seeking to cooperate with the world. And such kind of cooperation de facto mean it's providing opportunities for newly emerging countries, including especially the BRICS member state, has their opportunities or it's have their times to providing more constructive input to the world systems to make a better modifications of these already existed infrastructures represented by these payment systems. And on the other aspect, the second hand, when we talk about these payment systems, actually sometimes we believe the proper running and the management of such kind of infrastructures is very symbolic and meaningful ways to understand how the great powers were using its powers. It's a little bit pathetic that sometimes, especially last year when we have this Ukraine-Russia crisis, we find the rising of the geopolitical concern overtaken the normal rational understanding of this information, these financial infrastructures. Those countries like United States and its EU partners try to use the system like SWIFT as kind of new tools to launch sanctions toward other countries and try to use its influence powers inside these payment systems as kind of, components or useful diplomacy tools to make deterrence or even coercives to change other states' behavior. It's rising, it also triggered a very wide concern whether we can have a more stable, secured, and confident environment for the proper running of these financial systems. And it also raised the questions: is it a proper times for countries represented by the BRICS member states to launch, to accelerate promotion their already existent no-dollar payment systems to make these world financial infrastructures more stable, more secure, and more functional? I think the The second is the second point is the development of ICT technologies and ICT-sponsored financial practice in BRICS member states already providing a very concrete basement for the development for such kind of no dollar payment systems as a very useful option component for the world. It's quite clear from China's side, the no dollar payment systems, the chipsets, something like this, providing us very useful knowledge and experience how to building these kind of payment systems. But according to China's experience, maybe such kind of payment systems, they are not independent from each other. They are not purely parallel with each other. They can have some interconnections and interactions, which means mainly we use these systems to launch a no dollar payment. But if necessary, we can launch secure and controllable interconnections with the already existent payment systems. The development of ICT technologies providing such kind of possibilities, they can providing us these very useful technical solutions. And the second, when we're talking about the development of these optional or the second payment systems, the things which is more important than real payment systems, maybe it's more important for us to have an independent technical standard, which can providing as an emergency backup option when we concerning to dealing with the potential or the rising geopolitical risks on these things. In my mind, I did not agree that we finally will go to a two-standard or parallel standard world, which means maybe those United States and its partners has their own standards, and BRICS countries and other countries has another standard, and this standard is independent with each other. I think such kind of parallel standard systems will be a disaster. From China's perspectives, we try to push forward to keep the existence of this one standard world, and these technical systems, these technical ecosystems need to fit for with each other. We need to have these possibilities to have this interconnection to ensure that our one world has this one web, one cyberspace, and this one ICT systems. But on the other side, we need to have some backup plans to develop a kind of optional payment systems, which make people have more options. Any countries in the world, they can have their own options. They can have their freedom to choose dollar-based, dollar-centered payment systems and maybe no dollar-centered payment systems. The different payment systems providing nearly the same functions and can allow the peoples to interconnect with each other's financial activities as much as possible in today's world. As such kind of these multiplications of payment systems make people have more options is more and more important in today's world. And third, I think when we talking about the development of such kind of payment systems, we need to accept the lessons produced by the United States since the Second World War. I think the United States already proven that in today's world, no single countries and no single currencies could and should become the only main pillars of any payment systems or currency systems. In future, definitely we need a kind of basket. Different currencies will be including in such kind of basket, and the percentage of each currencies in this basket should fit for their percentage of their real economies in the real world, so that we can ensure such kind of currencies can become more stable, become more robust, have more flexibilities when countering any possible risk, no matter from the financial aspect or geopolitical aspect. In these payment systems, when we're talking about the new payment systems, we need to have a quite more open standard to accept as much as possible for those participants, those people who willing to contribution their resources, capacities to the development of such kind of new payment systems, because these payment systems are very important global commons. No matter how many countries will use it, definitely any kind of this payment system should be a global commons. And this global commons of global public goods should be shared, should be co-built, jointly buildings and jointly governed by all the participants, so that each countries can use it in a quite trustful and safer ways. And such kind of payment system should become public goods rather than diplomacy or strategic tools for single or very few states. And this is maybe the most important lessons we learning from the United States when using these SWIFT systems as kind of tools for coercive diplomacy. It launched very huge damages to the reputation of these SWIFT tools. And last, of course, not the least, I know that a lot of people believe China it's kind of rising powers, and China had this strategic ambiguities to launch some new systems to replace these payment systems dominated by or produced by the United States. But that's wrong. Frankly speaking, when we're talking about those financial peoples inside China, they are more open-minded than you can believe or guess. For their understanding, it's only the options. For China, the main concern or the only concern is the China's national interest, including ensure the financial securities of China. But they also understand for China, it's impossible to ensure its national interest just to duplicate United States way to launch its so-called hegemonic interest in the past 2 or 3 decades. And China must ensure its national interest in a creative new ways, which we name it share the destiny of global human community and something like that. We believe that all the peoples around the world belongs to the human communities, unless we can make proper contributions to the security, prosperity of global societies. It's mission impossible for China to launch a sustainable development in the foreseeable future. So we are willing to contribution our capacity, technology, and resources, and help to building such kind of new payment systems. It's an option, but this option is open, just like the Asia Infrastructure Investment Development Bank. We just make an open proposals. Any peoples, any countries have their interest in can join these proposals, and we have a quite internationalized, very equal and very open standard procedures, and allow and encourage peoples to participate in this process. I think so on that aspect, building or talking about whether we need and how to deliver such kind of new payment systems should become one of the most important project for BRICS countries in the next few years, because it can become a second, visible, concrete results after we have this new development bank. And now maybe it's a proper time for the BRICS countries to develop new payment systems, or at least we can raise these options and proposals to the world as a new contribution for the BRICS countries to today's world. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yi, for those thoughts, nuggets, and I know that colleagues have taken note of them. Some of them echo what was raised earlier, and then during also the Q&A. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know I've run out of time for my session, but I am going to ask the speakers to respond to these three questions. The one question raises the question that it seems that in order to have this common currency, you need deep integration similar to what we've seen in the EU. Therefore, asking the question whether BRICS is heading in that direction, is it really having deep economic integration taking place? Or you think the pose of the question is mistaken? You need deep economic integration to have this alternative currency and payment system sustainable. That's one. The second one is about the fact that Africa is moving towards a single currency, whether that idea of a regional currency assists this process we're talking about or not, or it's of no consequence in terms of the search for alternatives payment system. What Professor Yi talked about multipolarization of payment system, a multiplicity of payment system that are inclusive for everyone. Maybe I'll just start with you, Ekaterina. I knew that. I don't know. Yeah, I'll start with Ekaterina. Maybe Ekaterina, you might want to talk about cryptocurrencies, whether they are an option as well there. Ekaterina, can we have your last shot on the basis of those questions?
Yes, of course. So regarding the cryptocurrencies, I think that it's a future, but it is a distant future, and it is a long road to that future, because I can speak only from the Russian experience and the experience of the Russian laws and lawmakers and what people are thinking here. Yes, it is possible, and it is a great opportunity to establish our own digital currency and to control and effectively watch for the market of the cryptocurrencies. It is really widely discussed here, but it is a long, long road. And I think that the discussions will be until 2030 minimum. And it is not what Russian government is discussing to implement now because of the different financial problems and issues that arise now with the sanctions and all the other stuff that is happening now, and all the shocks and other things. So yes, it is possible. It is also possible for the creation of the digital currency, not cryptocurrency, but digital currency in terms of the BRICS Union. But later on, when other problems will be addressed and when more discussions and I think that promoting the joint dialogue and creating joint actions, because a lot has been said on the BRICS platform, but not so many has been done towards joint actions. A lot of dialogue, everything that has been said and discussed, but we should move towards the actions and implementing them in the current international arena and doing something together, not only speaking about something. Also, the question is, I think, regarding the economic linkage and comparing BRICS and Euro area and European Union. I think there are a lot of differences between the Euro area and the BRICS Union, because we have come together not because of the closure between the countries. There are we come together because of the economic opportunities and the amount of trade volumes that and the amount of economic things that we bring together to the world arena, not because we are close enough, but because of the trade linkages and other things. So I think that we should nowadays, BRICS does not have enough conditions for the deep integration, but we should refer to the previous answer, because we should create those conditions and create this infrastructure to become together and be able to establish the single currency and de-dollarization as well, promote de-dollarization as well. I think that any more question, I believe.
Whether you think a single African currency will contribute to this, or it's not a major issue?
Can you repeat the question? I
whether having a single African currency, right now Africa has like 39 currencies, but Africa is moving towards a single currency. Whether you think that can contribute to what we are talking about?
Yes, I think it will contribute, but not in a great way, because we can also ask the members of the African countries to join the BRICS in this joint action towards creating a different financial system. So yes, I think it will affect also.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ekaterina. That was very insightful. Akshay, you want to have your parting shot on the basis of those two questions, or any one of them?
Maybe that I'm a little surprised about the common African currency related questions, because we've all seen not only do we need a deep economic integration, but a deep political integration as well for something like that. And then there is a question of central banking and who runs the central bank. I mean, the Eurozone has been a great case study and everything that went with it. So I think that will require another few hours and a separate panel discussion. So that's the only thing.
But the question is whether that idea is related to what we are talking about.
No, I mean,
would you offer assistance in the idea of creating alternative payment system, or it's of no consequence?
I mean, they're interrelated to the extent that they are all finance and economic related, but but it's one thing to create like interoperability between different financial systems, which is more of an infrastructure issue. It's more of a foundational infrastructure plumbing issue.
Yes.
More technical also in a way, regulatory and technical. On top of that, we have to first think about trade integration and business integration. And then we talk about monetary policy and political integration. So we are far from payment system where and single currency where we have a big gap. You know, it's not feasible to discuss it at this stage, given where.
No, thank you very much. But also, you had said earlier on, you need to build a system on which you place the current system.
That's right.
The payment system. We don't simply declare it.
That's right.
It is an outcome of building. So that deep integration that colleague was talking about that enabled the euro to happen.
No, I don't see any such conditions is maybe the short answer.
Thank you very much. Professor Yi, you want to comment on that idea that you need deep economic integration in order to have a BRICS currency, common currency, or a BRICS payment system? You need deeper integration than you see now in economic.
I think we can have a kind of a roadmap. We may launch this will take quite a long time. But in my point of view, maybe the payment systems it's a first step. This because it's relatively more easy to launch, because these payment systems mainly you need to solve those technical issues. Well, most of them is technical issues. But if you want to go to the currency issues, especially launch producing a new currency, that's be more complicated. In my point of view, in the next 5, 10, or 20 years, most single state, the great powers, including United States, China, Russia, and South Africa, and India, they will try to launch or accelerate the development of their digital sovereignty currencies in certain aspect. But it will be difficult for them to develop regional common currencies, because these regional common currencies, as we already learned from the EU, the European Union, they push for the EU, that you will find such kind of regional new currencies. The main obstacle is not technical aspect. The main obstacle comes from the development speed, the domestic economic structures, the government's capacities on doing these fiscal and tax policy and so on. It's quite non-technical issues, more difficult for people or for state to launch joint actions. But joint payment systems or kind of those electronic payment systems shared or based on some common technical standard, it's relatively more easy to launch. And the development of such kind of electronic payment systems can help to facilitate the cross-data fellows on financial aspect, which is can have a very constructive overfill affections, which encourage people to launch more concrete and comfortable corporations, facilitate their investment, their trade, and other economic activities, and providing and then make it possible to building a more concrete joint basement for any future deep integrate among these countries or statements. Okay, that's my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ekaterina, Akshay, and Shan. Thank you very much for your insight and the discussion. I've laid the background now for our next session, which is, of course, shared by our dear friend Karin Vasquez, to whom I hand over now. But thank you very much from my side. I hand over to Karin to proceed. Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zonti, for the and the panelists for the brilliant session. In the second session, we're going to discuss how to advance the BRICS payment system. And our panelists are going to present and discuss some concrete proposals and experiences that could inform the design, the launch and implementation of the BRICS payment system. And each speaker will have approximately 10 minutes for their initial remarks. We will then open the floor for questions and answers and conclude the session with a brief answer by each speaker to the question, is it time to advance the BRICS payment system? And if yes, how can it be done? So tonight, our first speaker is Dr. Irina A. Dr. Irina, she's head of Department of Economics and Banking Business at the University MGIMO in Russia. Dr. Irina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Karin. It's the great honor just to take part in the discussion. And actually, first of all, I would like to express deep gratitude to our South African colleagues South Africa actually is the BRICS chair, and we had the great opportunity to take part not only in the academic forum, but to discuss some extremely important aspects within the BPTC. And as far as the member of BTTC, I would like just to let our colleagues know that we have come to conclusion that it should be the joint research on some subjects that are of an interest to all of our countries, and currency and its future is just one of such subjects. Soon the recommendations will be finally settled and will be forwarded to your kind attention. And I would like also to express gratitude to the University of Johannesburg and to Professor Sondi in particular, because this university contributes greatly to our mutual research as far as the currency is concerned. And there are just the representatives of the Johannesburg Scientific School who are just involved in this subject. My topic actually is dedicated just to the BRICS payment system, and I'll try to be strict to the subject and just to the time limit. Actually, we are just living within one and the same paradigm of the relations in spite of any approaches as far as economic and political aspects are concerned. We are acting as entities, the public or private ones, in the market with just the range of regulation and the different intermediaries that take part in this activity, and trying, according to our resolutions, and to reach the economic growth in the interest of the population of our countries, and just work accordingly to the requests of the financial stability and social responsibility of the activity of public and private sector entities. Actually, I'm also interested in just the post-pandemic recovery, and as far as BRICS is concerned, most of the countries are very active within the Eurasian Economic Union, and most of the countries of Eurasian Economic Union have agreements with BRICS countries and BRICS Plus. And just they concern the direct and portfolio investments, national currencies including. There are some great projects such as Northern Sea Route, and another one that I would like to mention is just the BRICS Eurasian Union payment system. We are discussing several aspects concerning the development of settlements in national currencies. Happy to mention that in 2012, within the resolutions, there was an agreement between our countries concerning the development of settlements in national currencies. And we are going along this road. But we take into consideration that the regulation in some of our countries is rather strict. And that is why probably it is worthwhile studying within the joint research the possibility of the introduction of a single, probably digital currency, because most of the central banks of our countries are just involved in this aspect and take concrete measures within it. But while speaking about the BRICS multilateral mega system and the payment system is concerned, we within that system are planning to introduce the payments of just private entities within the retail activity, then the cross-border payments, and follow there is a technical probably interference. I'm not quite sure whether the recording has stopped or not, but anyway, it's worthwhile if it is going on, because we will be happy to get such kind of recording, because the questions that are under discussion within our webinar are of real interest and of the subject of our future research. So within the mutual system and the development of national the payments in local currencies, we can set up just the system that will help us within the card payments of different sorts of them. And the practice has proved us that, generally speaking, the development of the payments in national currencies, or just going on the road of issuing a single currency, is not so just difficult and long. It's just the question of a political will from one point of view, and from the other, there should be some functional rules and just the definite operators of the payment system that are presented by just special institutions in each of our countries. Then there should be a range of requirements for consumers and the general principles of supervision. We are not speaking about some alternative system. We're just speaking about the BRICS payment system that is probably more secure than any other payment in other currencies, the third currencies, that are risky at the moment. And all payments in national currencies or not, they go through banks, and that is enriching the role of our financial institutions and banks as far as their participation in our national payment systems is concerned. There are different global currencies. The main aspect of them is just the economic demand that exists between our countries and the ability of the national currency to perform as the money abroad, doing payments, savings, exchange base, etc. That are the features of our national currencies, and just the legislation that is going along within the central bank's activity at the moment. That persuades that the payments in national currencies will certainly develop, or one currency has the power for its enrichment and existence from one point of view. And from the other point of view, there will be a certain debt of dollar or some other currencies, because actually they don't meet the economic demand of some of our countries and do not possess the ability of the national currencies abroad. Actually, the United States probably after taking the measures that are not that were not logical and that were against the usage of their currency as the global currency, feel it, and there is a difficult period as far as the US is concerned with its currency. But it's another story. Let's return to ours. As far as the development of our national currency payments, actually taking into consideration that we have agreements starting from 2017 between our stock exchanges, there is a possibility to develop the project of international financial centers, BRICS international financial centers, and the banks with BRICS participation that are hereunder suggested to your kind attention can just take part in this activity while carrying out different operations and using different financial instruments in their activity. Within that, swaps. That is one of the questions concerning the debt that was put just on the table today. Swaps is one of the possibility in national currencies to cover the debt problem. there are different other mechanisms of debt management, and it's also another story, but anyway, just swaps is just one of such kind of a possibility, and historically swaps proved that they are very successful in this respect. I was mentioning the necessity of the mutual regulations. It means that there should be a certain harmonization of regulations within the spheres that are involved in financial activity of our institutions in different aspects. And that is very important to have a complex approach while developing activity of our entities and supporting them in different preferable trends and activities, while financing them in national currencies or in one currency within the mechanism of public-private partnership. That is just a form of cooperation that helps the entities and the public institutions to reach the economic development goals. Within that, on different phases, national currencies should be and can be used according to regulations and resolutions of the leaders of our countries, starting from 2012, as I have mentioned. The Prime Minister of Singapore has mentioned once that the private sector creates wealth, and we depend on a certain extent just on this sector. That is why the banks for development and New Development Bank including should certainly take into consideration that there should be great attention paid to such kind of projects that help the entities just to reach their goals, and the government to enrich the funds for just fulfilling to reaching the goals of economic development in the interest of population. And within such institutions, it's worthwhile having different trends, subsidiaries, and different types of activity, within the some key lines concerning the settlements in the national currencies and project management. There are several models for secure cooperation in national currencies. Here they are, and just probably while our national committee on BRICS research will take part in different multilateral researches indicated in the recommendations and resolutions of the members, of the heads of our states, will certainly develop these ideas, taking into consideration their prerequisites that are quite important for the development of operations in national currencies, such as a clear legal framework, transparent tender process, flexible concession agreements. That's very important, and it's just also one of the form as far as conversion is concerned within the debt management itself, because there can be restructuring and conversion, and within restructuring and conversion we can freely use national currencies. And the feasible payments structure, it is very important for our future cooperation. It is, as I have mentioned, not so difficult because there are different historic examples and experience of the International Bank for Economic Cooperation, for example. It was set up specially for settlements in a single currency for several countries of the Central and Eastern Europe, for some Asia, Cuba, and Mongolia, and Vietnam, and a lot of countries took part in it, and it was just a political decision, and it was set up within the agreements of the heads of our states with the participation of the central banks of these countries that were the participants, and that's it. So if there are questions, I will be happy to answer them, but at the moment, I would like to thank you cordially for your kind attention. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yaredina. Dr. Irina Yaredina, she's the head of the Chair Economics and Banking of the International Institute of Energy Policy and Diplomacy at the IMO under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, and also head of programs of the Financial University under the government of Russia as well, and a member of several important financial and government associations, and last but not least, member of the board and research director of the National Committee on BRICS Research. Thank you very much, Irina.
My pleasure.
Next, I will invite Dr. Renato Coelho Baumann. Dr. Renato is a researcher at the Institute of Applied Economic Research, IPATC, in Brazil. Has his doctorate in economics from Oxford University, and he was also professor at the Department of Economics at Universidade de Brasília, Brasília University. That's my alma mater as well, Renato. And Dr. Baumann served as director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean office in Brazil between 1995 and 2010, and is currently coordinating the external economic relations at IPATC. Dr. Renato, it's a great pleasure to see you again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Karin. And thank you very much for the organizers for inviting me for this very provocative and updated discussion. It's a particular and personal pleasure to meet a number of old friends from the BRICS family from my times at the BTTC. Now, it's very difficult to comment on Professor Irina's presentation because it's very detailed, so 10 minutes wouldn't do. What I'm going to do is to make some overall generic observations with regard to the issues that brings us here together. Let's go back to basics. What is exactly that we want? What we want is to foster trade and investment among our economies as a means to foster economic development. And for that, we are, all of us, concerned with reducing transaction costs. It's what's go down is precisely that. Why so? Because we have to change our domestic currencies into dollar, and we receive dollar, we have to change that into our domestic currency. So there are a number of costs involved here. And the issue is how to make that simple and reduce those kind of transaction costs. And involved on those costs is, of course, currency risks. Now, the Russia-Ukraine war brought us a new issue that has already been mentioned, the weaponizing of the sanctions on reserves. That brings to all of our countries the issue of what do I do with my reserves to make it not able to be sanctioned in the way that Iran and Russia have been recently. Now, what does history tells us? There has been a number of common currency areas over time. Since the 19th century, the franc area, the sterling pound area, you name it. And what's the basic precondition for you to have a currency area? There are at least three: political decision, sound economic relationship, and the acceptability, so to speak. The currency has to be accepted for all the participant countries. So Since the end of the Second World War, of course, the dollar has gained importance, but keep in mind that this has only become a very important issue since 1958 and even more so in 1961, when we started to have convertibility of the main currencies, the European currencies vis-a-vis the dollar, because before that, we had to use domestic European currencies or gold to have dollar, even among European countries. Keeping in mind that the European countries already had 2/3 of their international trade among themselves, which is an issue, a fundamental issue to keep in mind if we go back to the questions of the previous session with regard to the possible African currency. Even so, for Europe, even though they had 2/3 of their international trade among themselves, it took, I don't know, 50 years in a number of exercises to reach the euro. Now, okay, expectations matter, liquidity matters. So why is it that in every single economic crisis since the 1940s, the forecast was systematically, oh, now is the end of the dollar? As it turns out, the dollar, the US dollar, remains the main means of exchange and the main currency component. Why so? You have the economic and political might, military might, sorry. You have the fact that this is a currency that's highly accepted, and you have the very fact that it is the only economy that can issue high standard and universally accepted government bonds. So it makes easier for you to operate in dollar, even though that imposes transaction costs to everyone else. The exuberant, what's that, the expression, the exuberant, I forgot, the French president once used that the exorbitant privilege of the dollar vis-a-vis every other currency. Now, what about using domestic currencies for our transactions among the BRICS? It's okay, because it reduces transaction costs, but it's okay at the micro level. For a company to have the possibility of using renminbi or rubles in its transaction with China or Russia, it's okay because it reduces the transaction costs I have just mentioned. Thing is, that's okay at the micro level. When you bring that to a discussion of at the national level, that's another issue, a totally different issue, because we are not talking about reducing transaction costs anymore. At the national global level, we are talking about the degree of acceptance of a huge amount of those domestic currencies of other countries else than dollar, euro, yen, as increasingly renminbi, but it's still very much, renminbi is still very much a low share of in this scenario. Now, of course, we have a new dimension here, which is digitalization. The digital currency might make, or will definitely make it much easier to think in terms of alternative mechanisms. But it's still something to be seen because there are a number of involved issues here. Digitalization of cryptocurrencies is one issue. Digitalization of domestic currency is another totally different issue because it relies upon conversibility and trust on those currencies. It has to have the central bank behind, and it has to have the commitment by the central bank to honor the operations in that currency. You have, of course, security issues involved. You have other issues related to the degree of progress that has already been achieved by some countries vis-a-vis in comparison to other economies. Give an example. I've just been last week in Beijing. All of you know well and have been to China several times. In my last 3 or 4 times that I've been to China, one thing that called my attention is the difficulty that has been imposed upon foreign tourists by the very fact that the Chinese system is now so digitalized. For a foreigner, you cannot call a taxi, you cannot pay, except that if you use cash. Other than that, it's simply not acceptable. So it's a very binding constraint for foreign tourism. And when you take that experience up to exchange among countries, the very use of the digital currency, when you have such a distance in terms of its actual use, I don't know how to manage that. It's definitely an issue, and it's not a minor issue. Now, how to do that then? Well, you have to think in terms steps first. How to start reducing the use of US dollar among our economies, not by big steps or by big dreams, but there are some feasible experience that you might start to think of. And what we have had here in Latin America, South America in particular, in the 1980s mostly, we did have a debt crisis, we did have an oil crisis. Nobody has, we all had huge debt and low stock of currencies. We just didn't have the dollars for using trade. And what we did was to activate a mechanism that formally existed since 1965. In 1982, it was reactivated, and it proved to be very useful, to the point that in some point in time, in its peak moment, it corresponded to 90% of the investment financing among our countries. It was called CCR in Portuguese, a reciprocal credit agreement in a free translation. It's basically a settlement mechanism whereby you use it a trade operation with, say, Brazil and Argentina. And instead of disbursing $1 million US, you would make the operation, and Argentina would make an operation with Brazil. And after, say, 3, 5, 6 months, the two central banks would sit together and see who would be in a surplus position and who would be in a deficit position. So that if you are in a surplus position, all you have to do is to disburse that difference. And hence, instead of using millions of dollars, you will only have to disburse hundreds of thousands of dollars for reaching an equilibrium situation. It worked quite well, as I mentioned. Why it's not operating anymore? Well, a number of issues that had to do with the risks assumed by the central banks, a number of operational things. But it could be revisited as a good example of something that can be thought of in terms of a mechanism, a first step towards the broadening, A, the use of domestic currencies, and B, the reduction and significant reduction, for that matter, of the use of dollar. Not only make it viable, but also provide, if the BRICS want to provide us a signal towards the use of the dollar, that would be a tool in terms of providing mechanisms, given the amount of trade that we have achieved among our countries, which is not a small amount, that would provide a very significant signal in terms of reducing the dependence upon US dollars for our transactions, and not experimenting with something out of this world in terms of the use of domestic currencies that don't have universal liquidity and so on and so forth. And I end my first intervention in terms of making reference to the creation of the BRICS Financial Think Tank Council. And I think this debate today brings to the possible agenda of issues, a number of issues that can be taken into consideration by that council whenever it starts to operate. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renato. It's brilliant presentation as always. I would like to invite now Dr. Camila Villar Duran. Camila is associate professor with ESCA. She's an international legal scholar and consultant focused on issues like money, finance, cryptocurrencies, international monetary financial laws, and gender equity in financial markets. She's associate professor of law at ESCA School of Management in France, and she has a PhD in international economic law from USP, University of São Paulo, and the Sorbonne in Paris. So thank you very much, Camila, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Karin. I'm trying to share my video, but it was blocked by the host. So I don't know if it's possible. Yeah, okay. Maybe now it's, great. It's working now. So thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you for the organizers. Thank you for this kind invitation, Professor Vasky and Professor Zondi. It's a pleasure to be here with all my colleagues sharing these two roundtables. If I may, I would like to share with you a few slides. I think this topic was already mentioned in a certain way by Professor Ekaterina in the beginning, and also by Professor Renato. So let me try to adopt this perspective in a way to contribute to this debate on how to build monetary cooperation among the BRICS countries. And currently in my research, and I'm a legal scholar with a background in international economics, so I'm adopting here an interdisciplinary approach to this issue. I'm looking into the impact of central bank digital currencies, so CBDCs, on monetary cooperation, and why I believe this is very important for the BRICS countries. We can see different international organizations, but also central banks around the world discussing the possibility of issuing its own tokenized version of sovereign money, so the CBDCs. So developed countries, advanced economies, but also emerging market economies, they are working on this issue. BRICS countries, they are working as well. And I think even though it is a state-led project, a state-led policy, what I'm trying to look into is how the development of a world crypto economy is, in fact, pushing central banks to work on that. So it's a market demand in creating a on-chain monetary instrument, so a type of monetary currency, a type of money that can be used in distributed ledger technology platforms, DAT platforms, such as blockchain. What I mean by development of a world crypto economy, I can see now a process, the growing process of tokenization of different assets in financial and capital markets. And I'm not talking about here of Bitcoin or Ether. I'm talking about the digital representation, so in tokens, of different types of debt in financial markets, the representation of shares, different types of financial and financial instruments and securities in a tokenized form. And this process of tokenization, in fact, creates a demand for cash equivalents, so tokenized money, that can serve as a means of payment in this kind of platform. For now, only private stable coins are thriving in this economic function, but and here I can mention one of the comments raised by Professor Renato. This kind of stable coin, which are not exactly stable, they are reinforcing the US dollar's exorbitant privilege. Today, more than 98% of stable coins, fiat denominated stablecoin, they are denominated in US dollars. So we can see the power of US dollar represented in this kind of private stablecoin, but they are not yet fully regulated across jurisdictions. So they are very, very risky. That's why central banks, they started to create their own version of tokenized money. So technologies, and particularly blockchain, DLT, they are accelerating the creation of new legal forms of money for domestic and cross-border uses. And I think here it's very important for BRICS countries. CBDCs can allow more efficient cross-border use, cross-border transactions. What lies ahead in the future, and these are my two key points in terms of implications for the global monetary system, the global monetary architecture. It's more of monetary fragmentation, so more types of currencies that can be effectively used as a means of payment internationally, and the emergence of a new type of international monetary cooperation. So based on digital currencies and particularly CBDCs. So I'm starting this new research project, but previously I worked on this, looking into this changing legal nature of international monetary cooperation. So I could see that after 2008 crisis, to respond to the crisis, so different countries, they invested more in monetary cooperation, but they changed the forms that this usual type of cooperation takes place. So from multilateral funds, such as the IMF, and one regional example, the Latin American FLA, to the development of a network of central bank swaps in US dollar, but also in local currencies. And I can mention here the US dollar Federal Reserve Network, but also the Asian Chiang Mai Initiative Multilateralization, the creation of the BRICS CRA, the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, which is not operative yet, but also bilateral swaps in renminbi and other currencies. And they were particularly mentioned by Professor Irina in her presentation. So they function as international lenders of last resort. So we need international currencies, international money, but in times of crisis, we need lenders of last resort. So central bank support in this type of monetary cooperation. So I can see the emergence of this new network of central bank swaps. What is changing? So in terms of actors, we can see this movement from cooperation from ministries of finance as key leaders to central banks. So central banks, they're implementing international monetary policy. A change in the legal nature from multilateral funds as a legal entity to swap contracts, which are more flexible and sometimes maybe not so certain in times of crisis. And the legal economic drivers for this change is, of course, international money, the euro dollar. How the CBDCs can change this scenario, this institutional scenario. So as I mentioned, CBDC is a tokenized version of sovereign money, but most important, and it was mentioned here before in this discussion, CBDCs, they allow to build a new financial infrastructure. So when I'm looking to CBDCs, I'm looking to how they can change the financial infrastructure for global transactions, global economic transactions. Currently, 120 jurisdictions representing over 95% of global GDP, they are exploring CBDC, or they already created its own CBDC. That's the case for China, for instance, with a special pilot involving 260 million people. But also in Brazil, we have the Brazilian Real Digital, which is a pilot to create a specific DLT platform to be implemented in 2024. And we can see from the different political manifestations of the Brazilian Central Bank, there is a special policy aim on cross-border transactions. And it's worth to mention that one of the projects that was tested last year in Central Bank called Leaf Challenge was a project related to cross-border transactions between Brazilian reais and Colombian pesos. So we have a case here within Brazil, particularly concerned the CBDCs, the change of different tokenized money into local currencies. A really interesting case study for BRICS countries now could be the MBridge project, which was initiated last year. It was a platform, a DLT platform involving in which 20 entities were participating. So central banks and commercial banks from Hong Kong, Thailand, mainland China, and United Arab Emirates. So this platform could conduct 174 payment and foreign exchange transactions, totaling over $22 million, the equivalent of $22 million. But what was most important in this pilot, there is no need of a third currency or even SWIFT communications. What is very interesting that CBDCs can be exchanged among themselves without going through to the use of a third currency. And the DLT platform allows for the transfer of information running at the same time the transfer of funds. So today the inefficiencies of the infrastructure, the financial market infrastructure, coming from the difference between the exchange of information using SWIFT communications, and then this exchange of information triggers the transfer of funds. So within DLT platforms, you have both. So we can get atomic settlement with finality in real time, even 24/7, allowing for 24/7 transactions. So you can reduce credit, liquidity, and settlement risks. So this kind of pilot already exists and could be very useful, particularly for BRICS countries. Here, just to show you what it means exactly, this kind of platform. So in the case of MBridge project, they conduct 3 types of transactions. So domestic issuance and redemptions of CBDCs, cross-border payment using domestic CBDCs, so not going through a third currency, and cross-border foreign exchange transaction to implement payment versus payment transactions. So this is how it looks, a DLT platform. So in the center, the central banks, but also commercial banks are part of this structure. And outside you have the corporates implementing international trade and using this financial infrastructure to settle their obligations. In terms of implication that I'm trying to keep in time here, so which are the 2 main critical implications with this growing process, with this growing project on CBDCs? So first of all, global monetary fragmentation. So technology, DLT, blockchain, and geopolitical forces, they are driving the emergence of new global currencies, the possibility of local currencies to be used to settle international obligations. CBDC supplies, they have the potential use for cross-border transaction. And here China is clearly a key actor. And the BIS Innovation Hub, the Bank for International Settlements, it seems to me the most important international organizations to those projects. Again, we can see monetary cooperation away from multilateral funds, such as the IMF. So this new type of money demands a new type of international organization and new type monetary cooperations to be implemented. In this way, could we see now the emergence of a multipolar world, a world of plurality of money? And here I'm looking specifically to a comparison to the Middle Ages. In a time we could see the plurality of money. This was the financial reality of the merchant banks, particularly in Italy. And one of their key innovations that I'm looking specifically into is the bills of exchange. So a type of legal innovation in the Middle Ages that allowed for foreign exchange transactions, but at the same time, deferred payments, so credit. So multi-CBDC DLT platforms, they are really good, or it seems to be really good to conduct foreign exchange transactions, so to settle international obligations, but we are still lacking projects on deferred payments on credit. And here, I think that my new research project have a particular breed or a particular connection with my previous work, because I can see that today the institutional design that could be used to support these CBDC platforms, the institutional design could take the form of a network of central bank swaps in local currencies, so support of central banks to this kind of platform to support cross-border transactions and allows for deferred payments and allows for credit. And I think particularly this kind of instruments is very important, and it was confirmed by the 2008 crisis. The lessons from the 2008 crisis, they were again used during the 2020 crisis, the COVID crisis, and recently in 2023 after this the financial crisis within US financial market. Which are the main policy, just the second critical implication, the emergence of this new design for multilateral cooperation. So this combination of CBDCs and network of central bank swaps. I ask myself if eventually a cluster formed by the BRICS could support this kind of technological development to exchange BRICS currencies through the same platform and avoid the risks of using different platforms. And of course, this requires political and economic cooperation, further political and economic cooperation to find the best technological solution for these countries. What kind of policy and legal lessons that we can draw from these different experiments? It seems to me that cooperation among central banks, so beyond ministries of finance, but among central banks, are key to this new financial infrastructure. So the emergence of these new financial infrastructures. DLT blockchains, it seems to me, also key to development of this new infrastructure. And it comes specifically from the possibility of having interoperability of CBDCs and DLT for cross-border transactions. But again, as mentioned, and I'm trying to link my presentation with Professors Ekaterina and Shani, the focus, I believe, should be on building a financial infrastructure as a public good. So states, they can build together this kind of financial infrastructure to be used by private actors. BIS, it seems to me, the key international forum to do that with the expertise, but also with the technologies that can be used by these countries. And I believe that economic history shows us certain lessons that we can use in this case. So first of all, the first layer, if we are talking about CBDCs, of course, they are created by states, but as a response to technological innovations created by markets in terms of new forms of money, the demand for a new form of money. And the second aspect, we need more state cooperation, and central bank swaps could be one type of cooperation to assure deferred payments in different countries. So these two levels of cooperation, it created first a platform for settlements in local currencies, and two, a type of cooperation among central banks that can assure credit in times of crisis, but also to give the support of trust to economic agents to use local currencies in international transactions. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Camila. Thank you so much. A lot of food for thought. Would like to invite Professor Ngozi from the Institute for Economic Research on Innovation, IERI. Ngozi is Executive Director and Head of Research at First Source Money, Researchers in Money, Banking, and Macroeconomics, and a founding board member of the London-based Monetary Reform International. And he's a former banker and former economic policy official with the government of South Africa. Thank you very much, Dr. Ngozi, for joining us tonight. The floor is yours.
The conversation today is going to take place in conjunction with Professor Rasigan, who is unfortunately not here. I'll therefore take the slot as if I'm Professor Rasigan and myself. Right, Professor Zondi comes in with an issue that today, as we speak, there's a debate globally. That debate talks to the currencies, talks to the local currency payment systems, and of course, the de-dollarization that we now seeing right across the BRICS and even in Europe as well. But what I want to do for now is to locate this discussion into some geo-economic as well as geopolitical issues of the past, and then bring them forth to today to explain how the local currency system is supposed to work for the BRICS and perhaps even beyond. We all know that in 1944, during the Bretton Woods institution, that was a typical change, a complete shift actually from the previous system to a new one, where geoeconomically the British Empire wanted to continue with its dominance. Meanwhile, the Americans wanted power as well. So the discussions really for the 44 countries that sat at Bretton Woods was essentially between the UK and the US. 44 countries, 18 of them developing countries, South Africa, India, and so on. 18 of those, a large number of those 18 were from Latin America. For those of us in Africa and Asia, were quite few were simply escorting the UK, the dominant master then, and indeed the US, which was to take the mantle as the global leader. But the current system that we use today is essentially the Bretton Woods institution system. Little change indeed. In 1971, of course, there was this breakaway from the peg, the dollar, and then the fiat currencies became normal. But you see, then, from about then, the speed of economic integration was growing very, very fast. But the system of cross-border financial flows underpinning this integration was actually not keeping pace. And today, as we speak, the SWIFT system, while quite dominant, is unfortunately not as updated as we think. There are, of course, quite a few others in the process. For example, the continuous linked settlement system. That is pretty new and it's quite cheap. I mean, sorry, it's quite fast, but unfortunately, it's limited in scope. It can't be used, therefore, for many, many countries. So those of us in developing countries mostly can't reach it. So, so what then? We revert obviously to the SWIFT system, but what does this current payment system actually, what is it all about? It operates, as we know, typically through a global network of correspondent banks in all these countries. But it's just not about those just correspondent banks. It's those correspondent banks and the intermediaries right across, fragmented across time zones and operating hours. Even this correspondent bank system is yet to cover some of the developing countries as we speak today. So it's actually very cumbersome, even if it is the only system that we do have. So the current payment system exhibits high costs, pretty low speed, operational complexities, as well as limited access. And of course, there's no doubt that there's a bit of low transparency in there. So there are lots of inefficiencies to the current operating system, there's no doubt. And the question that arises then is, do we continue with the system that doesn't accommodate everyone? Whether we want to continue in that fashion is a question that we have to answer. But again, the bulk of the settlement occurs, this particular payment system occurs with commercial banks. So what it does, what that means is that there are a lot of risks that we get exposed to it. So the credit risks, as well as the liquidity risks. Our colleagues have mentioned about that earlier. So we have a settlement system that essentially is not available to everybody, has got risks, and also not as fast. But fundamentally, it's very, very costly. For example, we have about the transactions that pass through, it's about $2 trillion. And almost 120 billion of that is in costs. Those are the costs. These are financial costs, not these other costs that come with it. So about 120 billion, which is larger than the economy of Morocco, for example. These are the costs that developing countries have to incur, apart from the costs, which are geopolitical as well. The issues that happen to Iran, to Afghanistan, the reserves being actually stolen, if you want. All those become so costly to so many developing countries, to the extent that if developing countries continue to rely on a system that is not only costly, but which system also excludes them, then I think they're unlikely to change the course of events as we should actually be changing. So the traditional system, in my view, the current system, which talks to corresponding banks, is actually not as good as we thought, or as we think. So it presents lots of challenges for emerging countries. And fundamentally, is the fact that it is handled, or the system handles the payments in just a handful of currencies. Of course, the dollar is the preeminent currency in there. We have the euros and just a limited number of those currencies. That becomes quite disadvantageous for developing countries because the spillover issues that come with those currencies are quite large. So countries like South Africa, India, and so on and so forth have their monetary sovereignty actually tied up to this particular payment system. Should it be such that, therefore, these countries continue to work along this system, the SWIFT essentially, then our monetary sovereignty, well, now if we talk about monetary sovereignty, we essentially talk the macroeconomic sovereignty of a country is actually under the control of the US and the satellite economies of the EU. Do we want to accept that going forward? Frankly not. So then how do we move from this system that lots of liquidity access challenges. The swaps that we know that take place is only limited to about 14 central banks. The dollar swaps, for example, limited to only 14 central banks, when very few of them developing. And even those developing country reserve banks that have access to the US dollar swaps are non-BRICS countries. So it seems to me that the BRICS countries have a duty to ensure that alongside them, other developing countries must come in to have a system, a payment system, which can be broad, faster, but also cheaper. And then I come with this, therefore, to the issue of the CBDC that Camila just talked about now. So Camila refers to the M-bridge that she has extensively talked to it. And indeed, that system, in my view, is fundamentally important for all these developing countries to embark on. The Hong Kong, China, Thailand, and so on that Camila was talking about is just but one. There is another one that corresponds to actually this bridge between the Reserve Bank of South Africa, Reserve Bank of Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, about 4 or so. That aspect as well is being tested as we speak. So the development of CBDC is, in my way, the best way forward for all these currencies. You don't need a third currency with all these foreign exchange risks, or call it macroeconomic risks. All right. So essentially, should we continue with this current system as BRICS, which are basically saying we're tying ourselves, our macroeconomic fortunes are tied to London and Washington. And we know London and Washington system that we use now is for the total accumulation of resources, if you want, from the poor South. And the poor South, if they're going to have to be independent indeed, there's absolute need now, great agency, to have to migrate to a new local currency payment system. You know, I hear earlier my colleagues are speaking that, yeah, it's not very easy, and you know, it's going to be costly. We don't have the infrastructure and so financial infrastructure. That can be created as a matter of great agency. What it needs, one fundamental issue, is political will by the players. So if President Xi Jinping, President Putin, South African president, and BRICS, other BRICS countries decide today to have to build an infrastructure that is going to handle these local currencies, which we must necessarily continue to promote, that can be done in the fastest way possible. So I do understand that when our reserves are in dollars and so on and so forth, but we can change the reserves. But by the way, what are the reserves being in dollars? And then you can actually convert those reserves into euro, can't you? You can. All right. So even if our reserves are tied in the US system, you can slowly begin to migrate them. But as we integrate, we cannot continue. This fast integration within the BRICS cannot continue to rely on a system that's so risky, not just risky in terms of from the economic perspective, but risky from the economic perspective as well. I think it is incumbent upon researchers like ourselves to put in place a system that can address all these challenges. And the local currency payment system is fundamentally important. Now, you may say, well, so what? From there, how do we move? Should it be that we have created this local currency system? To me, at the end of the day, we need a national currency, not national unit of account. We all are clear that it was a geopolitical decision to go with the American system that we use today. The UK had a geoeconomic intent. John Maynard Keynes, we all know, came up with the International Clearing Union. So we can also, as of now,